Just in case, every time I say Motorola, I just mean Moto. I don't know how many times I already got this wrong. Because the phone that I'm going to review today definitely already on its own doesn't have an easy life. Because we are talking about the Moto G Play. But what I think it should have been called was the Moto G4. Because if you just look at the Moto... Back then, still Motorola G3 and also G2, what they all had in common was the Snapdragon 400 series of Snapdragon chipsets. But now with the current Moto G4, we have already the 617, so a higher end class chip, and that's quite confusing because I guess that's why most people don't even know this phone exists, which should not be the case. If they would have just remained the naming here with the G4 and created a different line of phones with the G4 and G4 Plus, I think it would have been better, because still there are a lot of people looking out for $150 budget phones, but now all think there is just the G4, which is not the case. But maybe this phone isn't even worth it, but maybe it is. So we definitely should take a better look at it and check the design and build quality. First of all, the design compared to its predecessors looks a little bit more pale. And yes, I will call it predecessors because I still think the G3 is kind of its predecessor. So whatever I will say in this review, that's what I think. I don't think this is anything different than the G3 successor. But about the design, it looks a little bit more, I would say, a little bit more on the boring side. Definitely something that is not all that flashy, but what it does really good, because what I really like, and I hope you will be able to see, there is a very fine pattern here, a small texture that kind of makes it feel like soft touch, and therefore it lies in the hand really nicely, soft and smooth, but also provides you with some nice amount of grip. We have nice curves on the back, so it lies really comfortable in the hand. In terms of size, it's still absolutely nice and compact because it is a 5-inch, and as you can see, yes, the bezels maybe aren't small, but due to its overall compact feel, it definitely is really nice in the hand. We have a little bit of a lip here over the glass to protect that. So this is all fine, no complaints here. This can actually be removed, but just to show this off real quickly, I won't really do it, but you can remove it, and then of course the battery is removable, and there you will also find the SIM card and SD card tray. So this is all fine. Therefore, since you can remove this, it does maybe feel super 100% solid, but it makes a good appearance because you can only sometimes, if you press harder, notice that there is a gap. Otherwise it feels very solid. I'm actually not even 100% if this is metal or not, because it feels very hard. And I'm not gonna say anything not to be wrong, but I think it is metal because it feels so hard, but I could be completely wrong. But if it's plastic, then they used some really high quality hard plastic. But just for the matter of fact, you can call me out wrong, I will say this is metal, even if it's maybe not. Okay, but otherwise, we have the LED here and the camera. Here we have, I guess, a microphone. On the top, we have the headphone jack. Left side is blank, and on the bottom we have micro USB along with this little cutout to open it. On the right side we have the power button that I still think is a little bit placed too high, because I usually only press the power up button or the volume up rocker to turn it on. But yeah, it's a little bit of a habit. I just prefer it a little bit deeper, but otherwise in terms of tactile and audio feedback, it feels fine, so all is good. As I already said, bezels aren't the smallest ones. Of course we have a notification LED, but it's actually not doing anything in terms of notifications, and maybe it's not even there. Maybe I just completely got that wrong. So this is something where you can call me out once again. I just can't remember with all these phones these days, but this is what it is. Of course we have adaptive display that every time you lift it up it will turn on, but I personally just don't like that so much, and that's why I would just say let's go to the display and to talk about that. And I gotta say, it's not bad. In this price range, I've seen already better ones, but it's absolutely what I would like to call solid. And if we quickly check the settings here, you will find one thing that is not bad, but it's also not all that great, because you have a standard mode that is supposed to be more realistic and natural, but I think it's a little bit too washed out. And then we have vibrant, which I think should have been standard, and I would have then wished for something that is even more so vibrant, because we all know Samsung, and Samsung is very popular for its displays because they are oversaturated, and I would have liked to have seen that even more so, because sometimes this display compared to all these other oversaturated phones feels a little bit washed out, even though I have to say the colors are quite accurate. They are definitely not overblown or anything like that. They are quite accurate, actually, quite natural and really nicely done. But I would have still liked to have at least an option to make it a little bit more vibrant if I want that. The white point is absolutely fine, maybe ever so slightly on the warmer side, but I would just think I was absolutely pleased with that. Had no issues. Black was also fine, minimal amount of IPS glow, so all good here. Viewing angles are not the best one, because what I've noticed, if you go on a diagonal, and you won't really be able to see this on video, the picture slightly shifts towards the warmer or colder side. But this is just something I won't really mention, because If you just use it normally, you will never notice. You can use it to this side and you can use it like this. It's only on the diagonals where it could be visible, but nothing to really be concerned about. Maximum brightness wasn't the brightest display ever I've seen, but it was absolutely fine. No major issues. And that's why I would like to go to the sound. First of all, about the speaker, I gotta say, it actually doesn't sound bad indoors, and it makes a good overall sound because it's quite on the slightly warmer side, definitely nice mids and clear highs, but in the end I would have maybe wished sometimes a little bit more volume, but it's not that I would complain. We have a front-facing one which is good, and overall it absolutely does the job. But I've just recently reviewed the Moto Z Play, which had also a front-facing speaker, which was so much louder. And I would have liked to have seen something like that. But for its price range, it's actually one of the better speakers, no real complaints. It's nothing out of the ordinary, but it gets the job solid done. And the same even more so goes to the headphone jack, because same as on the already Moto Z Play, it's very loud, it sounds very good, so quite definitely noticeably above average headphone jack, and all good from my side here. So let's talk about the performance. Let me end all the apps and let's start a few. Okay, let's check the loading times. Browser renders quite quickly, no real problems here. This could even be due to my slow Wi-Fi upstairs here. But it gets the job done nicely. Yep, as we are done, let's check a few more apps. And as you can see, definitely not the fastest one in terms of launch times. But we are talking already about a 150 euro phone, which are quite dated SoC. Of course, the SoC is not really the problem here for the loading times, because this is more to do with RAM speed and also storage speed. But it's not enough to break the experience. I had a quite good one, so all is fine here. In terms of browsing, as you can see, really nice and smooth. Okay, sometimes if it starts to use the browser, as you can see, it drops a little bit. But in normal experience, it was absolutely fine. Not really any complaints. It is still a solid chipset. Even though it's quite a slow one and quite an old one, it performs still actually fine. And there were actually, for some reason, a few more stutters here than I usually know it. Because as you can see here, if you just use it normally, it's fine. I haven't really seen many $150 phones that perform so much better, so it is still absolutely fine. It's definitely not the snappiest one, but once the apps are loaded, it's absolutely solid. It's absolutely reliable, it gets the job done. We don't really have much lag. It's just not maybe the highest frame rate and not the fastest one, but it's not enough to break the experience. If you want a solid phone for around 150, you will absolutely get this without any issues, because as you can see, scrolling is just fine. A few stutters and all that is actually quite impressive, because we have still the Snapdragon 8, it's the 410 here, which is quite an old one, quite dated, but they optimized it so well by the years that it still does deliver. I've seen even newer chipsets from other brands that didn't deliver so much, so all is good here. And even if you're talking about the gaming, I have to say that it really knows to deliver after all, because okay, it's just pushing a 720p display, but especially if you have games that have some kind of adaptive performance mode where it kind of sets the graphic details for whatever is matching on the SoC, it works out surprisingly well, because even some demanding games run pretty great, because you have to see it as one thing. It's maybe not the highest frame rate, but at least it's one thing consistent. I didn't really have any frame drops, which was nice to see. You could play all the games just fine. Of course, maybe don't expect the best graphical or overall experience, but you should definitely not get upset about it. It will deliver. You can play all the games, even some higher and still more demanding games. And the great thing is, since the Snapdragon 410 is, as we already know, quite an efficient SoC, we also had no problems at all with heating. It just got barely warm, which is absolutely normal in this range, and so everything has been here done really nicely. So I would say let's get to one thing that is called battery. As you can see, full charge 1 hour and 50, not quick charge 3.0 or something like that, but it's still absolutely acceptable. And if you check at the one thing here that I'm not so happy about it, 60 minutes of YouTube, 18%. This is not all that great, because the chip on its own is quite efficient, but not so much for video playback. Here I would have rather have liked to have seen something like 15%, but it's still fine, because the overall battery life is actually quite solid. I would call it something like between good or very good to great, because I still manage on one day, let's say 6 hours of screen on time, on mixed use with about 30%, which was absolutely bright enough for me because the panel got quite bright already early. And over the course of 2 days, you could even get close to 5 hours. Okay, sometimes I just maybe managed like 5.5, but overall the SoC is still quite good. The standby drain back like in 1 or 2 years back earlier was really efficient, but now we have so many, so it's not anything outstanding anymore, but it is still a solid standby drain and you can achieve a quite good battery life. So it should definitely be good enough for everyone who's a normal user for 1 day, definitely, and for the most average user I would say even 2 days I don't see as a problem. So all is fine here. So let's talk about the software, and there is not much to say here because as you can see here, this looks mostly like stock Android. They didn't really change all that much. Of course you have the system tuner, but since it is a slightly lower end phone, you don't really have all the Moto things because you have Moto display, as I already talked about it, but I don't really like to use that. And in terms of gestures, you only have swipe to shrink. As you can see here, you can, if this would be enabled, yes it is, you can upwards swipe and then you have everything smaller. This is something that the other phones have as well, and if you want to get it bigger, just tap on the screen. It is there. It's definitely handy, but after the 5-inch display really needs that is something that I would maybe discuss about, but other than that it's fine. We have of course the color mode and like power press button twice for the, yeah, but other than that it's absolutely okay. I've used still here, if you maybe see that, Nova launcher, but if you check real quick, of course we get the Google Now launcher. So this is what you can expect. So if you know that one, you will get that. It has a drawer, but I personally don't like it so much because it's still way too limited compared to Nova. But other than that, the software is absolutely solid. If you like the bare minimum design, of course updates therefore could still be possible, even though I don't think it will get over a longer period of time the best support. But Motorola Moto or Lenovo is still known, even though a lot of people did not expect them to get quite good updates, I guess. But we'll have to see if that changes. And I've said Motorola again, but that was kind of to be expected. But software absolutely solid, gets the job done. I'm missing a few options more that I've seen on other phones these days. Just a few small things like maybe rearranging the navbar and so on. But that's just me, and most people, especially the average user which this phone is targeted to, will be just happy, won't have any problems. Of course it's not something like an easy to use maybe experience like some LG and Samsung phones have these days, because I know a lot of average users and they kind of appreciate the options or settings they get from a Samsung or LG phone, and they are kind of a little bit lost when they talk about these stock Android phones, because a lot of the things that seem so easy on other phones you will have to download separately. But I don't want to drag this too further. Still absolutely fine. Now let's talk about the camera, and here we can already see the selfies, and yes, my face really was direct because it was quite cold, but as you can see, the selfies here are surprisingly sharp, and I definitely like what I'm seeing here, because I did not expect a 150 euro or dollar camera to provide that good shots. Because as you can see here, yes, this looks a little bit extreme, maybe it is, but after all, my face was very red. Of course, the exposure doesn't always work out, especially with hard light. As you can see here, my face seems a little bit overexposed, but it is fine, because colors after all seem accurate, and it's the sharpness that really impresses me. And even indoors with, I would say, semi-optimal lighting, it still performs absolutely okay. This is one shot in low light with the flash, and this without. And as you can see, it actually looks quite realistic even without the flash. Of course, it gets more grainy, and I would say indoors maybe not the best shots, but for this price range actually still absolutely fine. Of course we get grain, it gets a little bit more blurry, but it overall delivers. Of course the shutter gets a little bit slower and you won't get the fastest overall focus times, because the focus is one of the things that is a little bit slower. But if you go outdoors, you can see you can definitely get some shots with quite some details. Of course, maybe a little bit over sharpened in some ways, maybe sometimes not, but the overall results are really nice. As you can see here, lots of details. Exposure seems really fine, and outdoors, even though we don't have the fastest autofocus, the shutter times are absolutely fine, reliable. So it is quite a good, I would say, entry-level shooter if you just want to get your photos done without much hassling. This was all done in auto mode, and here, like I once again have to say, exposure looks really, really nice. Of course, it may be overexposed the background a little bit where there were a few clouds, but once again here already it is absolutely nice. And we can get some, for this price range, actually impressive shots, especially here. I like to see all those little details in that rose, which is something that I would have not expected. So maybe not the best shooter, of course not, but for 150, it will be hard to find many that can actually beat it or even compete with it. So all is good. Not really any major complaints, actually quite good. Now let's check the video. Actually not bad, I have to say. it needs quite a long time to stand still, as you will see now, to focus. But once it does it, it does it. It is still this kind of slower one pump autofocus that I'm not so happy about, because it just doesn't look so subtle. It just doesn't look like it's properly done, because it's way too obvious. But at least it works. As you can see, autofocus does the job. Colors seem nice, and what I definitely like a lot is that it is quite a smooth video, which I did not expect here. I thought a lot more jitter or something like that. Of course, we don't have OIS or so the camera is shaking a little bit, but that was to be expected. But yeah, a little bit of motion blur comes in if you move it a little bit faster. But I have to still say, for the price, it is absolutely solid, because the autofocus works reliable, even though pumping and not that soft. But it gets the job done. Exposure seems actually quite fine, and the colors seem realistic. So it's a definitely absolutely usable camera, and that's where I want to leave it and change the cam once again. So nothing to add here anymore. So let's get to the pros and cons so we can get that. And as you can already see, not a whole lot of cons. Of course, you have to keep in mind that this is considering the $150 price. If this would be something a lot more expensive, I would have found definitely more negative sides, but I don't think I have to mention way more. Especially something like the speaker, I almost had on the negative side, because it's not the greatest speaker, but for this price, it's doing its job quite fine. So let's get over the pros. Nice in-hand feel. I definitely like it. It feels very soft, compact, and with the, as I said here, back side material and texture, really nice and grippy. So I like it. It feels very smooth, actually fine. Maybe not premium, but definitely far from cheap. Solid display, and solid means good. Absolutely satisfying, because I would have liked to have seen a little bit more a pop, a little bit more contrast, a little bit more sharpness, especially with just 720p display. But it gets the job done, and I never felt over using it for a week like, it's not good enough. I could use it and it was fine. It was just not the highest end experience, which I would not expect to get here anyways. Good headphone jack quality. That is definitely a pro, because it's noticeably better than even some way higher priced phones. Still solid performance. This is using a more than 3-year-old chip, and it still gets all the stuff you want to done, especially since we have now 2 GB of RAM, where we previously on some versions had even less. So absolutely okay. Close to great battery life. So as I said, I would say expect like 5.5 to even maybe 6 hours over the course of one day in mixed use. So not bad. A removable battery, which is definitely something that has to be pointed out these days, because not every phone has it anymore. I personally never changed them, but it's good to have the option. Then stocky software, not much to add here. Good camera for the price, absolutely good value. And maybe the most important thing, no major flaw. Because if we look at the other side, slightly boring design, which is of course personal preference, but it doesn't do anything wrong. It just looks a little bit, yeah, nothing we haven't seen already like dozens of times. Quite dated SoC. Yeah, it's quite dated. But as long as it does everything you want to, not bad. And then slow pump autofocus, which is pretty much the only mentionable, or yeah, worth being mentioned negative, because that's one thing. But other than that, I have to say, for 150, I guess this would have been one of the phones that I would actually have no problem recommending. Of course, if we get closer to maybe like 200, there are phones like the Honor 5C, and of course a lot in between of Chinese phones at this price range. But if you are someone who shops at a local store and wants to get an absolutely solid phone, not break the bank, this is actually one of the better solutions, if not one of the best ones, because I have no trouble recommending this, because the overall experience for someone who wants a solid phone, because for example, I get asked a lot of times about the Huawei P8 Lite, which costs at around 150 these days, and I would actually prefer this. This was shaky, but I got it. I would prefer this, because especially something like the P8 Lite, yes, it had a better display, but the performance was quite close. But this one is still absolutely solid, but it was tanking in terms of battery life, and the camera wasn't all that great. But this phone is overall, for its price, on a quite actually high level, and that makes it definitely easy to recommend it without any problems. And I also have to mention the one thing. It is kind of the 4th generation of a G line, and kind of the same always, because you could also just pick up a G3 or maybe even a G2. You won't really get a better experience than then. Of course, they did some minor tweaks and minor optimizations, so in overall it works better. And I would personally definitely prefer it over the G3, because in my opinion it feels better. I never liked the feel in hand of the G3, and the display was kind of odd. The G2 though, also very similar. So if you can get the older ones for cheaper, no problem. But if you want the current phone that therefore will get the updates maybe for a little bit longer, G, play, all the way. That's it. If you like this video, which was already a lot longer than I expected, to leave it a thumbs up would be preferred, and comments down below, subscribe to the channel and all the rest, and I wish you a nice day. And I'm surprised that I take way more time to make these reviews these days. Not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Let me know. Do you want them to be shorter again or not? Yeah. Bye.